Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and today I've got another challenge video for you. Now, I know that as a beginner to scale modelling, you might not have that much money to spend on specialist paints to build your first model. But what's the worst that could happen if you decide to buy cheap paints? So in this challenge video, let's see if I can answer the question, is it possible to paint a model kit, which doesn't look completely terrible, with products costing less than £5? Firstly, I'm going to need a model. So I put up a request on my community tab a little while ago asking for suggestions. Ideally, to make it a real challenge, the kit must need at least 3 different paint colours, not come with paints included, so no starter or gift sets for example, and not be particularly hard to do, similar to something a beginner might pick up in the shops. Whilst I had some great suggestions, the most popular one seemed to be the Airfix 0 in 1/72 scale, and here it is. As you can see on the artwork, there is a lovely dark green on the top of the plane, a pale beige on the lower surfaces, a very dark blue on the nose, along with some other colours that will need adding. I think this will do just fine. So let's set myself some rules for this challenge now that I've got the kit. Firstly, I need to set myself a budget. I can only spend £5 on all my painting products. Not only does this have to go towards paints, but paint brushes too. I'm thinking like a complete beginner who doesn't own any of these things yet, so using anything paint-wise from my supplies is completely out of bounds. Secondly, I'm allowing myself the use of tap water to thin the paints if I need to. No specialist thinners though, unless I can buy them inside my budget. Thirdly, the same goes for decal solutions. They are not allowed unless I can get them with my money. The reason I've done this is because decal solutions can sometimes leave glossy finishes or change the look of the paint. So I could effectively cheat and use them as a paint if I wanted to. But I'm not. Finally, I can use any tools or cements that I want to which don't directly constitute as a painting product. So tweezers, knives, snips, sanding sticks, extra thin cement and precision poly, etc. are all allowed as long as it's not considered a paint. It's fair game. After all, this is a painting challenge. So, with those rules out of the way, what did I get with my £5? Like I said, I need some brushes. So I've gone for this £2 set of nylon brushes which have a variety of sizes. To go with that, I bought this selection box of acrylic artist paints for £3. So those mathematicians out there will know I've now used my full budget and this is all I'm allowed to use to paint this kit from now on. The brushes look to be okay on the whole, with fairly well shaped tips and ranging from a size 1 to 6. Probably not great for fine details, but should be okay for painting larger areas. There are a good selection of colours in the paints, which I can mix together to get different shades. No metallic colours though, so I'm going to have to improvise a bit. So let's get started. Throughout the build of this kit I will, as usual, snip the parts away from the sprue and then clean up the flash with my sanding stick. The pilot's chair was carefully cemented into place on the rear bulkhead using some Revell Precision Poly Cement. The control column was added to the cockpit floor and it was then joined by the control panel. Now it's time to do my first bit of painting. The ochre yellow and sap green were mixed together to make a more typical cockpit green colour. I added a little tap water to the mix to help it flow a bit better and hopefully prevent brush strokes being visible when the paint dries. I then applied it to the cockpit seat and bulkhead. And I'm already regretting doing this challenge. The paint just doesn't want to sit on the plastic. It keeps forming these little puddles and isn't uniform at all. It took about 3 layers of paint to get it looking barely reasonable. Next, the yellow ochre was used on the headrest of the bulkhead. Again, a few layers would be needed. Eventually, the cockpit areas were done. Kinda. It's okay though, because they will be inside the model and they won't really be visible. I hope. There was a decal for the control panel, so I cut it out and soaked it in warm water to release it from the backing paper. They were then carefully slid into place and left to dry. The chair and bulkhead could then be cemented into place on the rear of the cockpit floor. This assembly was then cemented into place inside one half of the fuselage, with the other half then being glued on as well. The back of the guns were glued into place on the bottom of the nose of the model. The black acrylic paint was then applied to the back of these guns. This paint isn't too bad if I'm honest, at least it's not behaving like the green and yellow. This assembly could then be added into its place in front of the cockpit. The wing halves are glued together, then added to the fuselage. The horizontal tail surfaces and rudder can also be glued on. I'm whizzing through the build as it's the painting part we all really want to see. The propeller parts are all glued together. Some small details are added to the wings. The arrestor hook is glued to the bottom of the tail, which is followed by the tail wheel. The various engine components are all glued together here. Now it's time for more painting. The white and sap green were mixed together to make a light beige colour for the lower surfaces. I used a tiny amount of green and a lot of white. It was then painted onto the lower surfaces. Oh, how I'm beginning to hate these paints. Once again, it's just sticking to the plastic, instead just clumping into these odd patterns. For the sake of the challenge though, I will keep going. I had to keep applying loads of layers. This colour was really transparent though, and it got to the point where so many layers were added that the details were getting filled up with paint. Time to move on, I suppose. The green and blue were mixed to make the dark green for the top surface of the model. You might be able to notice that I put some of the beige on the top surfaces too. I did this to form a base layer and hopefully get the green to stick. Whilst it has indeed stuck to the plastic much better, it's still a really transparent colour. It needed a lot of layers to get even close to looking like one solid colour. The areas where the upper and lower colours met were pretty hard to do too. The brush wasn't exactly amazing and it left a bit of a messy edge. Being not a particularly fine brush either, the canopy was quite hard to do neatly. A cocktail stick was used to try and tidy up those edges around the frames after the paint had dried. The main colours are now down, so let's get those decals on. As previously mentioned, as solutions were not included in the budget, these transfers are being applied just with water. They were carefully positioned on the model in the correct locations according to the instructions on the box. I then left them to dry, so moved on to paint the spinner on the propeller with a light grey paint, which was made by mixing the black and white. I also used this on the blades, the landing gear legs, and as a base layer on the pilot. The engine was painted in the black colour. A few coats would be needed to get it even. The tyres of the wheels were also given a coat of this black paint. I'm finding it hard to be neat with this brush as it's much larger than what I would normally use for this kind of job. The rear of the propeller blades were next to get a layer or two of the black paint. I then dry brushed a little white onto the engine to try and give it a bit of a metallic finish, or at very least add some contrast. The black and blue were then mixed together to make a really dark blue which would be suitable for using on the engine cowling. If I'm honest, this was actually the best paint to apply out of the entire set. It went on considerably better than the others so far, not that it's saying much. When they were dry, it was time to add them to the model. First the engine is glued in place, then the cowling added over the top. The propeller was then glued onto its pin on the nose. The landing gear legs were then assembled, then carefully added into their holes on the bottom of the plane. As were the little landing gear covers on the edge of the wheelbase. There are these tiny extra bits of cover as well that were glued on here too. The pitot tube was cemented into the hole in the wing. Now it's time to paint the pilot. I made a wet palette using some water and kitchen paper in a dish. This will allow me to mix different paints up as I go, but still keep them damp enough so they don't dry out. First I painted his skin, then the jacket. This was followed by his life vest and his boots. Then some really thin black paint was used to make a kind of wash to bring out those details. Maybe I made it a little too dark, but I can wick that away as I move the brush around. The pilot didn't quite fit as he was, so I had to bend his legs out a bit to avoid the control column. He was then glued into place. Humbrol Clearfix was used to glue the cockpit canopy onto the model. Then finally, the aerial mast was added to the back of the canopy. And that's it! My build of this Airfix Zero in 1/72 scale as part of my £5 painting challenge is now complete. To tell you the truth, I'm not really sure where to begin with reviewing this build. I mean, the kit is absolutely fine, and I didn't encounter any real fit issues. The moulding is quite good and the details are quite nice too. The clear canopy didn't have any scratches that I could see, and those decals are great. The kit is in essence not a bad choice for someone who is just starting out. But that paint! I'm not sure what I actually expected to end up with at the end of this build, but I had hoped that it would look better than this. From normal viewing distances it doesn't look too bad, but up close it's just a mess of blotchy paint, brush marks, filled in details and inconsistent coverage. The decals have silvered due to the rough surface of the paint finish, and I don't think this model's likely to win any awards. But let's try and find some positives here, even if I'm clutching at straws. If I were a beginner, whilst I have undoubtedly made it incredibly more difficult for myself by using these cheap kind of paints, I think some valuable lessons would have been learned along the way. I would hope though, at the very least, that they would have had fun. And don't get me wrong, it was fun in a kind of self-punishment kind of way. So whilst I'm not likely to inflict this kind of pain on myself again anytime soon, I wonder if I can answer the question I set out at the beginning of this video. Is it possible to paint a model kit for only £5? Well, the model is indeed painted, with the majority of paint colours being reproduced. So in that regard, I would have to say yes. But is it painted well? No, not really. Had I perhaps chosen a model with a simpler paint scheme needing less colours, I could have simply bought a can of spray paint and used that to paint it. But then that would be a really boring challenge, wouldn't it? I think the jury is still out on this one though, and I'd be interested to know if you could paint a model kit using the rules I laid out here for only a £5. Let me know down in the comments if this is something you would be willing to try. Shout out to my patrons and channel members for the extra support they give my channel. I'd like to welcome KFS25, who is my latest member on YouTube. Welcome to the club. Take a look at the links in the description to find out more about how you can get involved too. If you are new here and want to support my channel for free, consider clicking that subscribe button and turn those notifications on so you never miss a modelling video. Dropping a like also helps to get this video recommended to more modellers too. Finally, one last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I will see you on the workbench again next time.